Happy Wednesday, Mount members and friends. Thank you for joining us for Lesson 3 of our virtual Bible study for the winter of 2025. Before we get started, I encourage you to invite someone to join you on Facebook, YouTube, or even by calling 804-203-9011. Let's get started. The title of this series is based on Pastor Mark Batterson's book, A Million Little Miracles. In the first two lessons, Pastor Tyrone Nelson discussed the truth that God is bigger than we think. We were encouraged, like Abraham, to go outside the tent, to look up and try to count the stars. The lessons highlighted how expansive the universe is and how powerful God must be that God can allow things to stay in orbit. One of our members sent an email expressing how she loves when science and faith intersect, and I do too. Another member shared in the After Bible Study chat that when she considers the complexity of the human body, it reminds her of the bigness of God. Same here. So for the first 2 weeks, it was like we were looking at God and God's miracles with a telescope. Today, we move on to the second truth that God is closer than we realize. And for that, we will be looking for God and God's miracles with a microscope. We're going to get started on our journey to rediscover the God who is closer than close, also known as God Most Nigh. Did you know that all human beings begin as a single cell? Recorded human history is about 5,000 years, but it wasn't until around 350 years ago that we discovered the cell. The discovery of the microscopic cell was as revolutionary as the idea of a heliocentric universe. Your body is an ecosystem that contains 37 trillion cells, and each of those cells is made up of 100 trillion atoms. Want to know a fun fact? In 2016, scientists released a study to say that the average adult has about 30 trillion human cells and just under 40 trillion bacterial, viral, and fungal cells that make up our microbiome. Now, even though that sounds gross, it was actually good news because previous thought was that there were as many as 10 times the bacterial cells than the human ones. Either way, it means that there are more bacteria in our guts than there are stars in our universe. Science has yet to identify many of the microbes that make up our microbiome, but suffice it to say, every cell in the human body is a microscopic miracle. Even more miraculous, the 200 varieties of cells in the human body are as different as blood cells, nerve cells, and skin cells, yet somehow each one knows its identity. Eye cells know to do eye things, while stomach cells do stomach things. We take these microscopic miracles for granted, but it's one of the great mysteries of life. We have gained much scientific ground in the last century, but the mysteries and miracles of the human body never cease to amaze me. And as one biologist put it, we are still struggling to define the very thing that defines us. In the Message translation, portions of Psalm 36 read this way.
God's love is meteoric, God's loyalty astronomic, God's purpose titanic, God's verdicts oceanic. Yet in God's largeness, nothing gets lost. Not a man, not a mouse slips through the cracks.
What that means is God is great not just because nothing is too big, but God is great because nothing is too small. That includes the minute details of our lives. In Luke 12, we find out that God knows the number of hairs on our heads. Psalm 56 lets us know that God keeps track of all our sorrows. The psalmist wrote, "You have collected all my tears in your bottle. You have recorded each one in your book." And in Isaiah 49:16, God says, "I have written your name on the palms of my hands." You are seen, you are heard, and you are loved by God. And I can take it a step further. God doesn't just love you, God likes you. In fact, you are God's favorite. And before you get too prideful, remember that God loves and likes the person you like the least as well. In the book, Batterson writes about a challenge he gave his congregation, which reminded me of the No Complaints November challenge that we've done here. Listen.
Many years ago, National Community Church did a gratitude challenge. The challenge? Try to thank God for the things you typically take for granted. A medical doctor in our church wasted no time. Drawing on her extensive knowledge of human anatomy, biology, and chemistry, she nuanced her gratitude like a postgrad.
God, I thank you for aerobic respiration. Thank you for mitochondria, which right now are creating ATP. Thank you for glycolysis. Thank you for pyruvate. Thank you for glycine. Thank you for leucine, and isoleucine, and tryptophan. And for the fact that all organisms that form amino acids have the same chirality so that my body can reuse the nutrients and cellular building blocks of the food I break down.
I can barely spell some of those words, much less understand them. To be honest, I had to look up pyruvate in the dictionary. It's a 3-carbon acid formed during glycolysis. It's oxidized in the mitochondria, where it fuels citric acid cycles and boosts oxidative phosphorylation. In simple terms, pyruvate plays a major role in cell metabolism by breaking down fat. As for that doctor, later that afternoon while taking a walk, she began praising God for bones and ligaments and tendons. She thanked God for genetic recombination, which made the cotton clothes she was wearing possible. While making dinner, she thanked God for the xylem in the plants she was preparing to eat. She thanked God for the bacteria in her colon that helped her digest food. Those are just a few of the million little miracles happening in your body right now. For the record, you don't need a medical degree to do this. There are things you know that I don't. It doesn't matter if your expertise is in automobile engines or parenting toddlers or roasting coffee. Start with that and see if it doesn't result in a laundry list of gratitude. Your gratitude list should be as unique as your fingerprint. Needless to say, this woman won the gratitude challenge hands down. You may be rolling your eyes at the level of detail, but this is important because until you have sufficiently counted your blessings, you aren't ready for the next one.
And I found out in the book that in the human brainstem, there is a cluster of cells called the reticular activating system. It's a key component of consciousness, and this reticular activating system determines what we notice and what goes unnoticed. Because the truth is, we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. Or to say it another way, we see only what we're looking for. This is a function of confirmation bias, perceptual bias, and response bias. If you're looking for something to complain about, you will always find it. But the inverse is also true. If you're looking for something to be grateful for, you'll always find it. When you keep a gratitude journal, you train your brain to notice everyday miracles. It creates a category in your reticular activating system for any and every blessing. It becomes a cycle where gratitude is both cause and effect. How would your life be different if you created a cycle of gratitude? Now, while I don't literally count my blessings, I try to be intentional about thanking God for everything. When I take my first breath in the morning, I thank God for a new day. I tell God, thank you for the movement of my limbs, the ability to turn on lights and they come on. And now more than ever, I'm grateful for the hot water that comes out of the shower head when I turn it on. I express gratitude every time I make it safely to my destination. I'm thankful for the gifts and the talents that God has given me, for employment, for the ability to pay my rent on time. I am grateful. And I try to live my life by this quote by Robert Brault, which says, enjoy the little things, for one day you may look back and realize they were the big things. I encourage you to try to count your blessings this week. But don't stop counting once you've listed all the obvious ones. Keep digging deeper and deeper. Remember how God ended each day of creation? God paused and took joy in God's creation and said it was good. What if you set aside a few minutes at the end of the day to count your blessings? It might not change your circumstances, but I guarantee it can change you. Remember when the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness and God provided manna from heaven? They actually started to complain.
If only we had meat to eat.
We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost.
Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic.
But now we have lost our appetite.
We never see anything but manna.
Now, keep in mind that manna was a miracle. So the children of Israel had, in essence, lost their appetite for miracles. And let's not forget that the meals the Israelites ate in Egypt were free because the Israelites were not free. Talk about selective memory. But some of us have that same problem. And just as one person's junk is another person's treasure, one person's problem is another person's miracle. Gratitude isn't getting what we want. Gratitude is wanting what we have. It's a growing awareness of and appreciation for a million little miracles, like the ability to read. Most of us are able to read with relative ease, but that was impossible for most people on the planet for most of human history. Did you know that at the turn of the 19th century, the world literacy rate was 12%? Now, the author doesn't mention that this low percentage in the United States very well might have had something to do with the fact that for the majority of the 19th century, it was illegal for many people who looked like me to even learn to read. But since it's Black History Month, I want to be very clear about that. Nevertheless, the rise of literacy has rewired our brains in remarkable ways. Scientists have found that the parts of the brain related to language are larger than our ancestors. When we see a word, our brain retrieves the associated sound from our memory and maps it to the word. It's called phonemic awareness. Then, with the help of semantic processing, we attach meaning to that word. If you're looking at the screen, you may think that we forgot to spell check, but it's intentional. Because did you know that we can also read numbers instead of just letters? The brain's ability to read jumbled letters is called typoglycemia. If you don't believe me, try reading the paragraph that's on the screen. You may have already done it. We'll talk about that in our after Bible study chat. Some of you are listening to this Bible study rather than watching it, and it's no less miraculous. The outer ear functions like a funnel catching sound, and after traveling through the ear canal and hitting the eardrum, the vibrations bump into 3 of the tiniest bones in the body, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. Those vibrations spiral through a snail-shaped tube which contains thousands of microscopic hair cells that amplify the sound along the way. Then the 8th cranial nerve transmits those impulses like Morse code to the auditory cortex, where pitch, volume, tone, distance, direction, and meaning are translated into actionable information. Think you've never experienced a miracle? Every time sound waves make their mysterious journey through our outer, middle, and inner ear, it's nothing short of miraculous. King Solomon taught us that there's something to learn from every plant and animal on God's green earth. In Proverbs 6, he wrote, "Look at an ant. Watch it closely. Let it teach you a thing or two. Nobody has to tell it what to do. All summer it stores up food. At harvest it stockpiles provisions." Did you know that there are at least 12,000 species of ants with a total population of 20 quadrillion? That's 2.5 million ants per person on the planet. That number made me itch when I read it, and now when I say it out loud, I'm not a fan of ants. In the spring and summer, they show up uninvited in my bathroom, and I buy ant traps to get rid of them. But according to an ecologist at the University of Hong Kong, most ecosystems would simply collapse without ants. And the same is true for bees. Why? Because bees populate 70 of 100 crop series that feed 90% of the world. They are a key link in the food chain, responsible for $30 billion a year in bumper crops. And then there's the honey that bees produce. Along with antioxidants that reduce inflammation, honey contains 31 minerals like magnesium and potassium. Studies have shown many benefits ranging from cough relief to cholesterol reduction, and if properly preserved, honey never expires. Solomon was captivated by a species called the cedar of Lebanon. That tree is known for its longevity and resilience. It doesn't flower for 30 years, but it can live up to 1,000 years. Its trunk can grow to a girth of 25 feet, and it can reach a height of 120 feet. The cedar of Lebanon also contains a chemical compound that repels snakes. When Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, he didn't use trees that were native to Israel. He actually struck a deal with the king of Tyre and imported cedars of Lebanon by shipping them across the Mediterranean Sea. When you read the Proverbs, you know that Solomon spoke about animals and birds, reptiles and fish. From all nations, people came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. This king, who was David's son, was a poet and a songwriter. He was an entomologist and a botanist. He was an ornithologist and ichthyologist. Simply put, Solomon was the patron saint of holy curiosity. It was his ability to connect the dots by cross-pollinating different disciplines that made him the wisest man on earth. Serial entrepreneur Sir Richard Branson has a philosophy of life and leadership that he calls ABCD. Always be connecting dots. Whether we're talking about entrepreneurs or entertainers, poets or prophets, athletes or artists, genius is pattern recognition. It's seeing ecosystems where others see unrelated incidents. It's taking unintended consequences into account. It's recognizing intelligent design when we see it. It's connecting the dots, creation clues between nature and God. And I want to end with this story that's shared in the book that is a reminder of our call to be both generous and grateful, to see God not just in the big things, but in the smallest of things.
On September 3rd, 1939, German troops invaded Bielsko, Poland. A 15-year-old girl, Gerda Weissman, and her family bunkered themselves in a Jewish ghetto until June 1942. That's when Gerda was torn from her mother, Helene, who was sent to a death camp. Gerda would spend 3 years in a Nazi concentration camp, followed by a 350-mile death march that she somehow survived. By the time she was liberated by American troops, Gerda was a 68-pound human skeleton. The atrocities of the Holocaust are unconscionable, but Gerda's story ends even better than a Hallmark movie. In what must be one of the most improbable love stories ever, Gerda married the soldier who found her, Lieutenant Kurt Klein. There are 6 glass towers at the Holocaust Memorial in Boston that represent the 6 extermination camps where 6 million Jews lost their lives. 5 towers tell the story of unimaginable cruelty and suffering, but the 6th tower stands as a testimony to hope. Inscribed on it is a short story written by Gerda Weissman Klein, One Raspberry.
Ilse, a childhood friend of mine, once found a raspberry in the camp and carried it in her pocket all day to present to me that night on a leaf. Imagine a world in which your entire possession is one raspberry and you give it to a friend.
Imagine a world in which your entire possession is a raspberry and you give it to a friend. God is great because God does big things. But God is great because God moves people to do the smallest things that can have the biggest impact in our lives. Now, as we get ready for our After Bible Study chat, I want to hear your response to this question. First, how did it feel to read those words on the screen? And second, what is something that others may consider to be small, but it is a reminder of you how big and great and good God is? What is something that may be considered small to others, but for you it's a reminder of how big and great and good our God is? Okay, it's time to head over to our After Bible Study chat on Dialpad Meetings. You can get there 3 ways. First, you can download the Dialpad Meetings app so we can see you, you can see us, or you can go to meetings.dialpad.com/SMZBC in your web browser to get there. That's also a video chat option, or for audio only, you can call 804-203-9011. Thank you. Look forward to seeing you and hearing from you on the After Bible Study chat.